Welcome back, everyone. Very nice to see you all again. Let's see. I just so you know, they're doing some work on our internet service provider, and so there's a chance we might have interrupted connectivity. It might be done by now, but there's a possibility it isn't. So if you get disconnected from the movie, the from the meeting, rejoin. Okay, so immediately try again. Usually Zoom is really good about if you get disconnected, it reconnects you pretty quickly as soon as you get a signal again. So just be patient and it'll reconnect you. And if it doesn't, then rejoin, go back to your link and click on that. Okay, so let's get started um, with some meditation. 5 minutes calming. Be sure you check your posture, relax your body, and then set a very positive motivation for your activities today. And then spend some time focusing and calming your mind. Okay, so let's go to some review from yesterday. So yesterday we started talking about meditation again, and we looked at some of the antidotes to two states of mind that can happen while we're practicing this calm abiding. So one of them is this excitation where the mind is busy, and it's so busy with either internal, thoughts or external sounds, that it's very difficult for us to keep it with one particular object. So that's called excitation, where it's just busy. And then the other one is dullness or laxity. And that's when the mind is spacing out and falling asleep and losing a lot of clarity in paying attention to the object, that we may be, aware of the breath, but we're not really engaged with it. We're just sort of, falling off of paying attention. And we can lose our focus on our object either way. We can either lose it by being distracted and pulled away by these activities of the mind, or we can lose it just kind of spacing out, and it sort of floats away when that happens. And so the antidotes that we talked about, the first one for excitation is that we can loosen our focus, so not holding on so tightly to the object, because that creates a more busyness in our mind. That creates this tightness, creates an effect where the mind wants to resist being held in one place because it's very used to having its own habits. Lowering the chin can sometimes help, closing the eyes slightly, sometimes completely. It depends on what works for you. When we teach meditation, we try to teach it with the eyes a little bit open, because when you get further along on the stages of calm abiding and you get better and better at it, if you learn to only meditate with your eyes closed, you're more subject to a kind of dullness that happens, and you think that you're on the object, but you aren't really with it. And so having the eyes open. Something else I just learned too, that was really fun, was that if you meditate with your eyes open and you start watching the thoughts in your mind, then you don't get this sense that your thoughts are limited to your head, because the mind is much bigger than that. And the thoughts are not necessarily just in the head, but we do have that sense a lot of times. So when we meditate with the eyes open, we can get a sense that actually our minds are much bigger than just our heads. Thinking of a serious topic to get ourselves, to sort of boost ourselves to pay more attention. And this, when we do get distracted, relax immediately, release the thought, and then return. And then for dullness now we have a tightening of the focus and paying more attention. And then we could open the eyes slightly, let some more light in, and that's going to make us more aware. We can lift the chin, raise the sternum, sit up straighter. We can imagine a bright light or an inspiring topic, like I said, bodhicitta or Buddha nature, and this can get us re-engaged. And then if we do lose our object of focus because we're drifting, then we refresh our interest in the topic. So refresh, becoming more interested in the sensations of the breath. So paying more attention, restore our focus and then retain it. And if we're really falling asleep and we can't even stay with the object at all, we may need to take a break, get up, walk around, splash cold water on our face, and then try again. Okay, so then we also talked about attachment yesterday. So remember that attachment is similar to anger in the sense that with anger, we exaggerate the negative qualities and we can't tolerate the situation and we want to push it away. With attachment,
we exaggerate the positive qualities. And as a result, we want to hold on to the thing. We want to keep it close. And when so then when we do that, we develop this grasping, this clinging, and it becomes a problem, because when we're trying to hold on to something that is impermanent, that is constantly changing, it doesn't work, right? So we're disappointed consistently, and the more we try to hold on, the more we lose it, right? It goes because that's the nature of everything that is the product of causes and conditions. And so and the reason why we develop that attachment is because we have this belief that things exist out there, that somehow my good feeling that I get from something, whether it's flowers or cake or, jobs or people, that is totally dependent on the external thing, that my good feeling comes from that external situation, instead of recognizing that all of my experiences are a dependent arising of both my mind and the conditions that give rise to it. Okay, so then if I participate as much in the arising of these good feelings, then I have a lot more control over my mind than I do over the conditions that have come together. Okay. And so starting to recognize that we aren't at the mercy of our conditions, that we aren't at the mercy of our circumstances, that we can't control anything in our lives. We're just, things happen to us and then we react to them, and we feel, overwhelmed, or we feel upset, or we feel scared, or we feel sad, because of the way things are in our environment. When we start to see that actually that is a dependent arising, and that we have as much to do with the interpretation of our situation, and that the feelings that are arising are as much about how we think about the situation as it is what conditions are existing right now. So we can talk about reframing a lot of times. When we reframe a situation, instead of seeing it as something that we're helpless or we're overwhelmed, or those kinds of things, we can start to see it as a positive challenge, as a learning situation, as a place to practice and develop compassion. So it's starting, and then the emotions that arise are one of actually more control and more, we're more what do they call it, agency. We have more agency and more effectiveness over our lives. So let's look at what attachment is again. Exaggerates the positive aspects, sees the object or person as a source of lasting happiness. If they made me feel good in the moment, then they will continue to make me feel good. And then as a result, grasps or clings to the object. And then the antidotes, the main antidote to attachment is always seeing things as impermanent, as constantly changing. And the more that we get used to that view, that things are constantly changing, the less likely that we're going to be expect them to continue to somehow be the same as they have always been, and continue to inspire the same feelings in us as they always have, because we are changing, the situation is changing, people are changing. So then we don't grasp and hold on so tight, trying to keep things the same. And it's much easier to do this letting go. And then this practicing of gratitude and contentment is more like if we have a basis of gratitude for what we already have, and peace, a feeling of peace and happiness with what we have and who we are, then we're less likely to become attached to external things or situations to stay the same. We're much more already have a peaceful mind that doesn't need a lot. It doesn't need to have, new things all the time, or we're less likely to develop that clinging and attachment if we practice these states of mind. Something else, other antidotes to attachment, we can think about the disadvantages of developing attachment. The fact that attachment makes us feel worried, frustrated, disappointed, you know, have unrealistic expectations about people and situations. It creates so much disturbance in the mind. Okay. Now remember, when we talk about attachment, we're not talking about connection, right? Because quality relationships with others are very good. So the opposite of attachment is not detachment, okay? That's not an accurate way of looking at it. It is connection that does not have strings attached, that does not say, I will only love you if you act in a certain way, or I'll only be happy in this situation if it fits my idea of what is happiness. Okay, so it's not detachment. There's still connection, and there's still loving kindness. Okay, we can remember the negative aspects of desirable people, objects, and situations. So just having a balanced view of everything, you know, just seeing that everything has positive and negative aspects, and recognize how our mind creates this experience of obsessive desire, and that we can be happy without in any situation. We can learn to be happy with whatever is happening for us. So if you're starting to feel really, you know, closed in and shut in and limited and scared, you know, you can start to work with some of those attitudes and really analyze what are some of your beliefs about your situation that are leading you to feel this way, that it's an intolerable situation, that you're never gonna, you know, last, and see that actually life is up and down, always up and down. And even in the last few days, I've started to get used to the idea that I'm going to probably be teaching online for another couple months. Okay, so I've spent the last, you know, 4 years um, teaching with, you know, a room full of people, and now I have a screen full of people. And so it's very, you know, it's very different. I mean, I'm just very happy that people are coming, you know, to this. But it's also this shift, you know, my work day is different, and my, you know, I have a lot less interaction with people, which is very interesting. I'm actually getting very in touch with that. But it's still fine, you know. Then I, you know, I can live this way, you know, and also it's not going to be this way forever, you know. Seeing this too shall pass. That's something we say in English. This too shall pass. Nothing stays the same forever. It is always changing. And if there's anything we can learn from the situation that we're in right now, is that things change, you know. The whole world situation is changing. I read an article today, briefly, it said that maybe people are going to stop shaking hands completely. I know, and I think that would be so sad. I really do. I think if people stop touching strangers, you know, when you first meet, I don't like that idea. So hopefully that won't be something that will go out of existence completely. But I think we'll probably be washing our hands a lot more than we ever did. And in that way, that's a good thing. So good and bad. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so I want to review emptiness a little bit. So emptiness, this idea of dependent arising, that nothing exists independently. Everything is the product. Most things are the product of causes and conditions, and everything is empty of existing as let's see, in the way that it appears. So we see things as existing separately out there, independent of their causes and conditions, as well as independent of a mind that conceives of them. Okay, so when we look at this pen, okay, can't see myself, so here's the pen. You have to start to examine that when you look at this pen, don't you see it as something that is separate, that is a separate thing? It's like a pen. Even in our language, we say the pen or a pen or pen. That somehow it is something that can exist without all the causes and conditions that went into making it. So all the, the metal that was mined, the chemicals that went together in the plastic, the people that mixed the chemicals, that, designed the machines that made the pen, all their families, all the food that went in to support all the people who made the pen. And these are all part of the pen, because the pen could not exist without these causes and conditions. So everything exists dependently, and there is no absolute reality or inherent existence on its own, okay? So it cannot exist also with a mind that recognizes this is a pen, and it's something that can be written with, that exists in the mind, and that also has to be present in order for the mind to exist. Because I can also have a different view of this thing, right? It can be something other than a pen if I choose to label it that way. Now, it can't be a glass of water, and it can't be a cloud, okay? That's not possible. It can't come completely from the side of the mind and say this is something else. It has to act as what we call a valid basis. It has to be able to perform the function that I am labeling it as, okay? So what we're saying then in that case is that not that things exist totally separate from the mind, but also not that they exist only in the mind, but that they are what we call a dependent arising, a coming together. And just like we were talking about with attachment, if our minds participate in the existence of things in our reality, not just our attitude towards situations, but also on down to a deeper and deeper level of the objects that we interact with, then our mind becomes much more powerful in how our reality is defined, okay? And how our minds, what our mental habits are, then as a result start to influence much of what comes into our existence. And not just this life, okay? Much more limited in this life, but also in the future lives that we're creating for ourselves. Okay. So let's go on. Let's yeah, talk about this. All right. Now, do I really want to do that? Let's go right to a breakout group. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna divide y'all into groups, and I think we have about so let's do 50 groups, and that'll be 3 or 4 people in a group. So the question you're gonna ask or discuss is, okay, so in the light of this idea of the lack of inherent existence of things, then what is a self? How do we define me? So don't get into so much like, well, just take it wherever it wants to go. What is a self? Okay, so discuss that with the people that you put into a group. You can start by introducing yourself, saying where you're from, and then talk about this question. What is a self? Okay, all right, go ahead, Felipe.
Okay, I'm preparing the groups. Okay. Muted everyone.
134. Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. So where are you? Ronnie, where are you?
I'm from Israel.
Oh, are you a friend of Maya's?
Yes.
Ah, she told me about you.
Yeah, I was chatting with her. Yeah, we are good friends.
Ah,
And I'm
wonderful.
loving these settings and
Good, good. Andre, is that how you say your name?
Yeah, exactly. I'm from Ukraine.
Oh, are you there now?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I moved into Shita in November.
Oh,
So it's
last
good.
November?
Yeah, last November. I
Oh.
did the Introduction to Buddhism course with Glenn.
me too.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Not this November, a few Novembers ago, but with Glenn
Oh.
also. I
Nice.
just finished before this Corona another 10 days retreat with Glenn in Israel. So it's
Wow.
Mm.
like, yeah, came out and the Corona started. Yeah.
Wow. Cool. Okay, so you know what I'm gonna teach. I get to talk about what is a self in a few minutes. So you guys have to say what is a self for you guys.
Okay, you want to start, Ronnie?
I can say that in the last couple of years, and even more so in sometimes in really, really like when I have like meditation where I feel most focused, it's like I almost can feel the self and yet it is absent. Like, so I don't know the definition of it. I can feel it. I can sometimes watch what it's not really it does, but it's not, I can't find it, I can touch it, I can see it, but in really good meditation, there is like, for me, it's like everything is self and nothing is self, but it feels, I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah. But what exactly do you mean? Because I'm not sure I can relate to what you're saying. So what do you mean when you say I feel the self? So what is it? Is it a sensation or in your body? Or what do you mean?
Um, it's not, it's an experience, I think. It's not, it's just an experience of existence in, I don't know, other way. Like I try not to go to defining it logically because I did it a lot and I still do it, but I just had like this 1 or 2 meditation like from 3 years of practicing when it was really a strong sensation of like I felt that I was closer to the self as I ever been, and yet it was absent. Like I was watching the observer and it was very clear, but it wasn't there, and I just don't know how to explain it. But yeah, but what is your, what do you think self is?
Well, for me, self, it's more like an intellectual
Yeah.
construction. So, I mean, I kind of can maybe remotely relate to what you're saying, that there is a different way of perceiving the self. But for me, so far, it's been only an intellectual thing to consider.
Yeah.
And I mean, the way I understand the self, it's only intellectually. So
Yeah.
kind of, I mean, from the perspective of the Buddhism, what I could understand, for me, self is a label that we put on
On the
something
high.
that is ever changing, like
Yeah.
everything else, but for
Yeah.
the purpose of utility, we label something impermanent as self, like ourself, like an individual that's ever changing, but we give it a label as if it was something permanent.
Yeah.
Kind of like my intellectual understanding of self.
Yeah.
But
Or
I
a
mean,
stream of consciousness that we can.
yeah. So if everything is a stream, so like
Yeah.
we just create an artificial point in that stream, and like into it, saying it's fixed, it's permanent, it's self. The way I understand it.
Yeah. I sometimes say like a ring of fire, that the
Yeah.
fire goes really, really quickly and it looks very solid, but there isn't really a ring. So I think, but yeah. But then I also like just wonder what is the thing that watches it and what is the memory? Because if it's just like how we're, I don't know, I like the more I investigate, there is more question about what even the experience of the self. What is the causes and condition of? How can the self experience? It's like how can the stream of mind experience itself, or something like that. Like I have so many questions, but yeah. But I get like yeah.
Maybe you
Yeah.
can help us out, Drolma, a little bit.
Oh, I think you're doing great. I mean, and I don't know, I don't have, like, I can repeat what I've been taught, but like you said, my experience of it, I, you, I think you're right. Like what I picked up on was that we pick a certain point in our experience of this whole mind stream, and then we call that self. And then the problem comes when we reify it, when we don't see it as this constantly changing thing. And then when we start looking for that specific thing and call it a self, then it falls apart, doesn't it? It's like, because it's so many different things and it isn't really there as a reified, absolute, concrete thing, because that isn't how it exists. So not finding it, the way you guys are talking, then I'm not sure, like I can't, it is actually the experience of its emptiness. Okay, when you can't actually find that concrete thing, that is the experience of the emptiness of the self, when you look for it intellectually and you can't find it. And that sounds like what you guys are coming to. It's like, well, I know what it is intellectually, and sometimes I can feel it, but I'm not sure what that is, and that's because it's barely there, right? Lama Zopa says that the way we concretize it and make it into an absolute thing, compared to how it actually exists, it's as if it is not there. That's the huge gap between our view of it and how it actually exists. Okay, so it's not that it is really gone and not existent. It's just that when we compare the experience of how it actually is, it's as if it isn't there, as if it's completely, non-existent, which I think is really cool. My other teacher says, he talks about that sometimes we have to go even over a bit to this nihilistic, to this nothing kind of view, in order to get closer to how things actually exist. And that's why this idea of an illusion or a dream, like I'm barely here. And then there's so much more freedom with that, because I can be anything if I'm barely here, Oh,
Yeah.
did you want to say something else?
Well, I have a question to Ronnie. Ronnie, when did you first experience the self? Like, can you give me any tips, like very quick tips on how to start?
I really it's 40 seconds, but I was now like before the corona, 10 days of shamatha and vipassana with Glenn retreat, and then it was very intensive, and the meditation got like really and then it was just this strong experience. And the definition that I think that when we were discussing, this one girl said, I really felt like I almost could see the self, but yet it was absent, and I clicked like the experience. It's just that I think that it was more, my mind was calmer, so I held the object for a longer time in all of meditation, including the
Okay, wonderful. Few more people joining. Okay, you know what? I just realized this is the third breakout group that I've done. That almost everybody that, at least I've only talked for a few people, but I imagine I can extrapolate that many of you have done a Tushita intro course before. You know what we could do? It'll be interesting is if you can go to your chat, open up your chat, and raise your hand if you've done a Tushita class before. Here at Tushita, if you've been here and done a class.
You go to participants and then
Okay.
there's the raised hand button.
Okay. Yeah. Go to participants. Oh, look at all of them. Wow. Yeah. Someone did it with me. Cool. Still coming. Do you have a number? Do you have is it telling you a number, Felipe?
It doesn't give me a number, Venerable, but I can count them.
Okay. Leave your hands raised and then Felipe will count them and I'll start again. Okay. So let's go back to what is a self. So from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view, the Tibetans, let's read this quote first. I forgot about this quote. This is from Pema Chodron, and this is really helpful. Just interrupt me when you know, okay? Felipe?
Sure, I'll let you know.
Okay. As human beings, we are as impermanent as everything else is. Every cell in the body is continuously changing. Thoughts and emotions rise and fall away unceasingly. When we're thinking that we're competent or that we're hopeless, what are we basing it on? On this fleeting moment? On yesterday's success or failure? We cling to a fixed idea of who we are and it cripples us. Nothing and no one is fixed. So I'm going to read it again. As human beings, we are as impermanent as everything else is. Every cell in the body is continuously changing. Thoughts and emotions rise and fall away unceasingly. So we constantly changing. So where is it? When we're thinking that we're competent or we're hopeless, what are we basing it on? On this fleeting moment? On yesterday's success or failure? We cling to a fixed idea of who we are and it cripples us. Nothing and no one is fixed. Okay. So what the Tibetans did when they were talking about this concept of selflessness, and they were analyzing all the different teachings that the Buddha gave, and they were debating with non-Buddhists, they came together with a graduated system of reasoning that goes from the most obvious or the most similar to the way that we usually think up to the most difficult or most hidden or most subtle way. Okay, and this is called tenet systems, which is philosophy, systemic philosophy. Cool. So over half, have done Tushita. Great, thank you. Before, okay. So the so they do this. They did this with selflessness, and so what they do is that they identify how do we normally think of a self. What are some ways that we have thought of a self, and then they argue against those. So the highest school of Buddhism is called the consequence school, because it argues from consequences. So it takes, let's say, a non-Buddhist view, and it argues that, okay, if you believe this to be true, then this is illogical. Okay, so if you believe that that somehow the actual self is a soul that is unaffected by our body and mind, that is not subject to causes and conditions, then then how could it interact with you? How could it be you? Okay, so this is, and if this is a consequence of the belief that that you are somehow a soul that is separate from your body and mind. Okay, so let's look at, there's like 3 levels of selflessness. So when we talk about selflessness within the Buddhist tradition, we aren't saying that there's no such thing as a self. Just like when we talk about the fact that the cup is empty of existing in the way it appears, we're not saying that there is no cup, okay? In same way, we're not saying there is no self. There is a self. It's just that when we start to examine what is that self, our usual ideas are much more concrete, much more absolute than the way the self actually exists. Okay, so let's look at some of these levels. Okay, so one view that is most obvious, or sometimes, and this is one that actually we have a more acquired view of the self, is this sense of self that is permanent, so unchanging. So if you have ever been taught in a religious setting that the real you is your soul, you don't usually think of that soul as somehow changing from moment to moment. And you think of it as eternal, okay? Existing, it will exist forever, and it has always existed. Also, you don't think of that soul as somehow having parts, okay? Having, dividing into different, existing in a different way yesterday than it did today. And you don't usually think of it as dependent on causes and conditions, okay? Usually a soul sometimes is created by a creator God, okay? But it is somehow has some kind of an existence that is completely separate from an ordinary being who is sitting right here, okay? So the Buddhists originally said the first level of selflessness is the lack of that type of self, okay? The lack that a soul like that does not exist, okay? And the reason it doesn't exist, they say, is, like I just explained, is that if it existed in that way, then how could it have any relationship with this idea of a me? Okay, if it's totally independent, how could it interact with me, with what I experience as this I, this self? Okay, somehow it exists out there somewhere else, then how could it have anything to do with me, right? Okay, so that's their first argument against that. The second one that we think of is this idea of a self-sufficient and therefore substantially existent self. So this is the idea that there is a self that exists, and this is one that actually is innate. We don't necessarily have to learn this one. We already have an experience of this based on our ignorance of self-grasping. Okay, this is the idea of a self that somehow there is a self that exists that is both independent of this body and mind, and yet also interactive with it, so interdependent with it, okay? So even our language, when we say my body, okay, we have, the meaning of my body is that there is something that owns a body, that there is an I or a self that owns the body, that controls the body, that is the, is the owner or possessor, they sometimes say, okay? So in order for us to be able to own something, we can't be that thing, right? If I say my body, it's just like saying my cup, right? There has to be a me, and then there has to be a cup in order for me to own it, okay? So it's the same as this idea of a self-sufficient, that there's a self that exists separate from the body that owns it. Same with the mind. There is a self that exists separate that owns the mind, that controls the mind, okay? And we operate under this. Now the problem comes when we, not that we don't, we can function that way, no problem. The problem comes when we say that that self has some kind of substantial existence, that it has, you know, some kind of reality, existent reality, whether it's physical or non-physical, that is separate from a body and mind, okay? Okay, it has some kind of a substance that it somehow can exist. The image that they often give is this, is the image of a man walking along with a sack on their back, okay? And the sack is the body and mind, and the man is the self, okay? So the man can somehow exist separate from its sack, but it also owns or possesses or controls the sack, which is the body and mind, okay? Now, the argument against this type of self, which seems very logical, right? Because that's the way we act all the time. But the argument against this type of self is that, well, if that self existed that way, then we should be able to interact with it separate from the body and mind. We should know somehow that it is there, even if the body and mind are not there. Okay, and that's a problem. It's as if the man put down his sack, right? And then we can still see a man. But the self doesn't exist that way, because how can I know I'm here unless my body and mind is here, right? What is actually there that is separate from the body and mind? There isn't, okay? There is nothing, all right? And then the most subtle is this idea of an inherently existent self. So this is the idea that, okay, there's no self that is separate from the body and mind, but somehow if we look in the body and mind, we will actually find a self, okay? So then we say, well, the mind and body are the self, okay? But okay, so then the argument against that one is, if the body and mind are the self, if somehow the self exists somewhere in this body and mind, they are it, then we should be able to find it when we search for it, okay? When we start looking in meditation for this experience of a self, then we should be able to find it. And what we do a meditation and we try to look for it, okay? All right, so the meditation that we do is called the 4-point analysis. And we're going to do this in a minute in our meditation. Oh, how do I do that? Oh, okay, no, I'm right on schedule now. Wow, I was way off and now I'm right on. Okay. All right, so how do we do this? So the first thing that we do is we have to identify the object of negation. Now this is funny language, okay? Object of negation, what the heck does that mean? Okay, what that means is we have to identify the experience of the self that we're having, okay? That does not exist, okay? So we're saying that this experience of a self that is self-sufficient, okay, the easiest way to do this is to give you an example of this experience, and then you can identify it, okay? And that's your object of negation, okay? It's a view of the self as having an existence that is more substantial than it actually has, okay? So if I am just walking around, or I'm reading, or I'm showering, or I'm cooking, or I'm eating, you know, I have a sense of a self that is doing these things. but it's not, it is the self that exists, because there is a me that is walking and talking and eating. There is a self that exists. Okay. So our object of negation is not that self, because that self exists and we don't want to get rid of that. We need a self in order to function. Okay. The self that we want to negate, that we want to prove doesn't exist, that is the object of negation, is the self that we feel usually when we are, let's say, rejected in a relationship. Okay, so let's say someone breaks up with us, they don't want to go out with us anymore, and we start feeling this overwhelming sense of they have rejected me. Okay, so that huge, pain that you feel when someone says you're not okay. Okay, that is the feeling of a self that is much more concrete than a self that is reading or eating or walking. Okay, it's a sense of they didn't hurt my body, they didn't hurt my mind, there's a me that is here that has been hurt. Okay, that's the object of negation. Okay, another example is like when someone, let's say, talks behind your back and says, hurts your reputation in some way, like they blame you for something you didn't do, or they say, that you're, they just say mean things about you. Okay, so is your body hurt in that circumstance? No. Is your mind hurt in that circumstance? How can a mind be hurt directly? That's what we have to question. Can someone directly hurt my mind? No, they can't, right? They can't go into a mind and hurt it. That would have to be telepathy, wouldn't it? Like they'd have to insert thoughts into your head and say, you're bad, right? It's usually because we hear something, right? But the sense that arises in us is a sense of self that is very powerful and very strong, like I am not that, or I didn't do that. And then the sense of this I, we reify it, we clamp down on it. Okay, so when we're doing this meditation, we have to get a sense of that experience. Another one that we talk about is when we say, let's say we achieved something really amazing. Okay, so we won a race, or an athletic contest in some way, like we won some, some contest, or we got a really good grade on a test, or we, got a job that we were competing for. Okay, or or we wrote an amazing paper, or we cooked an amazing cake or something. Now, who are we thinking has actually done that, right? What is our sense of self when we achieve something? Okay, when we are really successful in some way. Okay, it's not just your body and it's not just your mind that achieved that. It's me, isn't it? It's this whole sense of me that did it. Okay, so we have this sense of an I that is bigger than just the I that exists. So then we have to agree on the reasoning. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this so you can you can see me too. So this sense of an I, okay, so the reasoning, the second step, agreeing on the reasoning. So the reasoning is, if the I exists in the way that that I am imagining it to when I have these powerful experiences, then I should be able to find it either in the body, in the mind, or somewhere else. And if I can't find it in one of those places, then it doesn't exist. Okay? So agreeing, so let's take an example. Let's say I have a cow. Okay, and if you've done my courses before, I'm sure you've heard my cow example. Okay, so I own a cow, let's say. So my cow, either it has to be in the barn, he has to be outside of the barn, okay, or he has to be somewhere else. And if I look inside the barn and my cow isn't there, and I look outside the barn on my farm somewhere and the cow isn't there, and the cow isn't anywhere else, then does the cow exist? Well, we would have to agree on the reasoning that the cow doesn't exist, okay? Because it'd have to be somewhere in order for it to exist. So you have to agree that that's true, right? That it's not possible that if I start looking for it and I can't find it, then it doesn't exist, okay? And that unfindability, that sense of I can't find that I that I thought was there, that existent I, means that that sense of self does not exist. And that feeling of unfindability is what counteracts this belief that I exist in this way, absolutely, concretely, solidly. And that's the I that I grasp to. That's the I that I think is so important, that I always have to protect, that is separate and independent from people and things, and that I have to make happy, and that I have to protect and push away all these things that aren't good. But if I have a sense of self that is much more connected, much more open, much more flexible, much more constantly changing, then I am less likely to get bogged down in this idea of a fixed sense of self, that I only exist in one way, okay? So we do this meditation. We look for it in the body. We look for it in the mind. If we can't find that experience of that powerful self, and then could it be somewhere else, okay? So this question of could it be somewhere else is answered by when we were talking about the first type of selflessness. If that self exists somewhere that is not my body and mind, then how could it interact with this body and mind? How could it have an effect on it? How could it actually be me? How could I even know a self if it somehow existed somewhere else, right? In the ethers, or you know, I don't know where else it could be other than right here with me, right? This is myself, okay? So so then usually we've answered that question. It couldn't be somewhere else. So when we're looking for it, we look for it in the body. Is it in my heart? Is that where my self is? But my heart is a muscle, right? Is it in my brain? Okay, is that what my self is? Okay, what we start to find is actually most of the time when I have this experience of a powerful me, that it is actually a hallucination. It's something I have made up. I have taken this label on this body and mind of, you know, like said, okay, Drolma is this experience, Drolma is this body. And then I've given Drolma so much more reality, so much more concreteness, so much more fixedness than I actually have. Okay, so let's do some questions. If you have some questions about this, we can take those questions, yeah, and then we'll do some meditation on this.
So please write down your questions in the chat. Okay, we have Nancy with a question. There you go, Nancy, you can ask your question.
Oh, good morning. Good morning. Thanks very much. As you were speaking about it, I had a powerful experience of what you were saying, and I think it's so important. And I am new to your course, so this is the first time. Is it similar to ego? Would you say this sense of this powerful me? Is it similar to the psychology term ego?
Well, the difficulty with the Western psychology term ego is that it's used in two different ways. Sometimes it's used as like a healthy ego. So in the sense that, you know, I have to have a strong, healthy ego in order to set boundaries, in order to, you know, and having a self-confidence is positive ego. But sometimes ego is used as having too big of an ego, you know, like we think we're more important than everybody else. So it doesn't apply, you know, completely equally, but some aspects of it, you could say it is ego. When you have a big ego, sometimes you could say that you have an overinflated sense of self.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, now I'll move on to, there's almost two same questions.
Yeah.
One person is asking to see the last slide, Venerable Drolma.
Okay. And there's someone that wrote to me privately. Lena has a question, Lina.
Sure.
Yeah, the last slide, this
Yeah.
one, the 4-point analysis, and we're going to do this specific meditation. So you will see this. Yeah, close. It's a close to it. Not exactly, but it's close.
And I'm unmuting Lena to ask her question.
Okay. Okay, Lena?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, if long-term meditators like monks and nuns get less self-centered and develop a lot of loving kindness and compassion, does it somehow mean that self-centeredness comes from an agitated mind which is full of delusion?
Yes. Yes to the second question. The first question, it depends on the monk or the nun. Just because we wear robes doesn't mean we're good meditators.
Okay, long-term meditators, no matter
Yes.
monk or
Yes, I think so. Because especially if they're meditating on the selflessness, because then this sense of me being more important starts to break up, because there is no me that exists as, you know, so separate from everybody else. We are all the product of causes and conditions. Yeah, so then it becomes much easier to focus on others, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I'm going to move on to AC, and he has a similar question to another person. So.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for taking my question and for this course. I had a question regarding the logic that you just said, not the idea in itself, but more the logic about the self not existing on somewhere else in the body or the mind. If you cannot see it, then it does not exist. In a few days ago, we were talking about the different realms, and one of the things was, it's not because you don't see it that it does not exist. And you know, if you have a reliable source saying it exists, then you can believe in it because other things as proved to be right, so it might be right. So I was a bit struggling with this argument because it was completely the opposite of, for me, the one few days ago. I mean, what if the Buddha had said, yes, the self exists in a soul on a different level that you cannot see, in a different realms. It's in your body or in your mind, but you cannot see it. And it's something around you in a different, I don't know, level, realms, I don't know. And you said the other we could not see should be related. And then, so for me, those two arguments, in one logic, we accept it even if we cannot see it, and the other one we do not. I was a bit struggling on this.
Okay. Yeah. Good question. When we accept that because even though we can't see it, it's because, like you said, there is an authority who's saying it exists. And the Buddha never said that type of self existed. Okay. The second thing is that those realms are not affecting us directly now, right? In the same way that the self is much more closer to us now. You know, like that's me that I'm talking about. When I'm talking about a self, I'm talking about me. So how, I guess that, and you know, this might be a question for someone who has studied this more, but that's my understanding of it, is that two things. One is that this self that I'm talking about is something that right here, in the sense that my experience of myself is right here. And it has so much to do with this now, that if it existed somewhere else, how could I even know it at all?
But for example, the continuity of our karma, we have a
Yes.
continuity that goes, it's still in us, and it's something like related to us, but we cannot
Definitely.
see it, and we accept it exists, and it's our
Yeah.
experience that we leave all the karma and the seed and the experience. It's something at the same time very close to us, and at the same time the continuity of our karma we don't see, and it's attached to but we accept that it exists still, and that it affects us.
But we do experience our karma. I think we do.
Yes, but we cannot find it.
Results.
But yes, but we could say we experience ourselves in a way.
Yeah.
So it's just like we cannot find the continuity of karma anywhere either, and still we accept it. So it's not that I don't accept, but it's just the argument is.
No, it's good. It's good. It's a good way. This is excellent, because it helps me to think too about it.
Sorry.
No, excellent. Okay, so let's see. The continuity of karma, I guess I do experience it. I don't agree that I don't experience the continuity of karma, because I guess I see cause and effect operating in my life. So, and I see that as karma, like the fact that when I habitually do something, I create the karma to continue to habitually do it. So I see the evidence of it, that it exists, and the evidence of a self that exists in the way that I'm talking about, I don't see that. I'm not saying, remember, I'm not saying a self doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's the type of self that we're talking about that is so powerful. And you're right, we do have this powerful experience of the self existing in this way. But logically, when we start looking for it, see, when I start looking for karma logically, I can find it. But when I start looking for this type of self logically, I can't find it.
Okay, yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
But thank you so much. Okay, one more.
Okay, I'll go to Karthik. There we go. You can ask.
Hi. Thank you very much for the course, Venerable Drolma. My question is just regarding, so I've just got this question where I'm just going to read it out because I was just thinking about it. And doesn't our current, thank you. So doesn't our current capacity to perceive and define this self limit our ability to see something as inherently existent or non-existent? So like, by that I mean, like, we can only negate something that we can surely define, and surely our thoughts, the extent to which we can work with our thoughts cognitively, and the ability to perceive what could be hypothetically an inherent self, it's limited by what our thoughts are able to do. Like, surely we can't disprove an existence of an inherent self just based on thought, because thoughts are limited, right?
So we have this tool of the mind that we're using to get free of ignorance already has ignorance. Is that what you're asking?
Sorry, I'm just trying to process. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. So if the mind is ignorant, then how can we use it to somehow get out of ignorance? Yeah. How could we even, if our self is inherently existent, how could we even imagine a self that is not inherently existent, or experience one or find one, right?
Yes.
So the mind actually, well, it has this ability, doesn't it, to imagine what is not immediately existent, what is not right here. We do have this ability to abstractly consider things that we don't necessarily know directly immediately. Okay. So, yeah, so this tool of discrimination that, or intellect, you know, or knowledge that allows the mind actually to eventually, first it reasons its way to the experience of selflessness, and then it goes beyond itself into an actual experience of it. Okay. But that's only slowly as we develop and educate and make our minds more flexible, more focused, then it can eventually get what we call a direct mental experience of it, and that's the removal of the ignorance.
Okay. May I just ask, just to follow up from there, like,
Sure.
So is it fair to say that we can't, I mean, intellectually saying that there is no inherent self is obviously, it's helpful to work with a hypothesis, but really the only way in which you can prove that there is no inherent self is through experience, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Awesome.
And
That's very
eventually
helpful.
you get there. Yeah, eventually you'll get there. But we
Okay,
start off with the logic because that's the way our minds work.
okay. And would it be wrong to assume, like, you know, have either hypotheses? I mean, I'm just thinking about it in the context of Atman in yogic philosophy, about the whole, like,
Right.
you know, the idea of an existing inherent soul. And I just wonder time to time, you know, I understand this merely labeled I, this bunch of desires, all of this stuff that's impermanent, but there is this, you know, idea that exists in other traditions where they talk about this inherent existence of a soul, and intellectually speaking, it's impossible to, like, you know, say which one is right, and only through contemplation can we, or practice, can we truly understand experientially whether, you know, there is an inherent self or not. In that context, is that appropriate or correct?
I think the Buddhists would argue that you don't have to wait for the experience, that you can logically challenge this idea of an Atman even before you get to the experience of it. But yes, truly knowing it intellectually, I mean, truly knowing it through and through, you would have to wait for experience. Yeah, so I guess I do agree with the second one.
Okay, thank you so
Yeah,
much. It's really helpful.
knowing it directly. Yeah, in order to know it directly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's do some meditation.
All right. So everyone, let's go back to a comfortable position. Let's go back to our posture. Set up again a posture that you can sustain for the meditation, and in which you can be comfortable, grounded, and stable. Keep your back loosely straight. First, allowing the bell to bring you back into the space of the body for a moment. Taking a couple of minutes to settle down the body and the mind, as we've done many times now. Give yourself a moment and the space to relax, to be free of all tension and agitation, dissolving all the tightness in the body, letting go of all worries and concerns in the mind. Settling down more and more. Going back to a state of balance, of serenity and tranquility. And from that state of calmness, gently bring the attention to the breathing. You can notice the breath and its physical sensations all around the body, wherever they manifest more obviously. And allowing the body and mind to synchronize in this space of calmness and attention with awareness. And so now we can begin to investigate even this activity of meditation. So check if you have a sense that there is a me meditating right now in this room. Do you have a sense that there is a me who is sitting, trying to focus on the breath? Do you have this sense of a me existing from its own side, not seeming to depend upon anything else to exist? This very solid sense of self, which is definitely there. If you ask yourself, what am I doing? I am meditating. Do you have that experience? So let us investigate if this me meditating can be found anywhere. So is this me meditating anywhere in the body? Maybe in our head? Is it behind your eyes? Where exactly is this me that is meditating? Is your brain the me that is meditating? Or perhaps the brain is simply something which the meditator uses? Perhaps this me meditating is in some other part of the body, maybe in the chest or the abdomen, your arms, your legs. Where exactly is this me meditating? Can you point to it with certainty? Perhaps you have a sense that your body itself is the me meditating, the entirety of the body. But isn't the body simply something which I am using? So if there's nothing physical that is this me meditating, perhaps the sense of self can be found somewhere in the mind. So now investigate that. Are any of the thoughts, emotions, or concepts in your mind this me who is meditating? Or are the thoughts, emotions, concepts something which I, the meditator, create and possess? Maybe the mind itself is the me that is meditating. Or is the mind simply something which I, the meditator, possess? Something which I am using and trying to train? If the self and the mind were the same, then we shouldn't be able to say my mind. Is the me meditating the collection of the body and mind? Or are the body and mind together something which I possess and trying to use in conjunction? Yet other than the body and the mind, what else is there? If the self were to exist outside of this too, if the me meditating had nothing to do with body and mind, how could I experience it? And if there is nothing more than the body and the mind, where is this me meditating? Who possesses and is training this body and mind? If you cannot find this me meditating, simply rest in that experience of not finding. But even if you didn't find this me meditating, isn't there someone who is having the experience of not finding. So there is a me meditating, sitting here trying to do this meditation. But just because there is a me meditating doesn't mean that that meditator is something solid and self-existent. This me meditating is empty of existing in that way. The meditator is empty of inherent existence. But this doesn't mean that there is no me at all. Rather, it means that the meditator exists dependently as something labeled onto the body that is sitting here and the mind that is focusing on the breath. The merely labeled me sitting here meditating. So just let that sink in. And slowly coming out of the meditation. We now move on to the dedication prayer. Again, reading from Shantideva. May all beings everywhere, plagued by the sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored and find repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Maybe so.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So now we have 2 days off, and then we'll start again in 2 days. It's Monday for us here in India, but it could be Sunday for some of the others of you. I don't know, I guess it would be Monday in the US too, which is the other side of the world. And then probably Monday too. Anyway. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone. I'm trying to send no, I can't send the dedication. Anyway, I'll put it on Tushita's website. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.